Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today I am going to talk about how to improve your web development work beyond what's possible with media queries alone. I assume folks who are interested in this call are familiar with responsive web design, and a major tool in our tool chest with responsive web design is media queries, which is something that we can specify in our CSS to allow us to sort of rearrange the furniture in our web layouts based on various things, most commonly the width of the window, but there are plenty of others. But sometimes your project gets so complicated, or the level of user experience demanded is so very, very high, or maybe browser specific, that media queries alone won't get you where you need to go. So you need something that's a little bit more powerful. So today I'm going to talk about at least one solution that you can use to get you there if media queries and other responsive web design techniques aren't solving the problem that you have. Okay, so we're not going to really have any slides today. Just got the one title slide and a finished slide. I'll actually show my last slide first. Because the rest of the time I'm just going to show examples in the browser and in a text editor. So hopefully you've got your glasses on, you'll be able to read what hopefully isn't too small of print. But the files that I'm going to be showing today will be available for download or as a Git repo after this talk. And if you do want to get access to them, you can use that subscribe link at the bottom there. And I'll send out an email later tonight or tomorrow morning with the instructions on where to find the example files that we go through today. Also, we are going to take questions at the end. I'll leave time for that. But if there's something we don't get to or something you think of later, feel free to ping me on Twitter. I think I'm pretty good about answering questions on Twitter, so always feel free to do that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is share my screen so that you can see my desktop. It usually takes just a second to load everything up. My Java chugging away over here. And bear with me while it refreshes. Hopefully I won't get another Java update. They always update at the most inconvenient time. Getting the beach ball. So while I am getting the beach ball, I will, here we go. I will start to explain what you're going to see in a second, which is I want to talk about the two main reasons why you might have to go beyond regular responsive web design techniques. The first case is that you need to increase the performance of your website or web application. So let's say you've got all sorts of different high-resolution images that you have that you want to deliver to the client to look gorgeous on large iPad Retina screens or other large Retina screens. But you don't want to send all of that stuff over the network to, say, phones just to downsize it on the client side. So it would be nice to be able to just send something that's appropriate to the screen size or screen resolution that the visitor is coming in on. Another thing that can increase performance is with responsive web design, you tend to write, it depends on how complicated the page is, but you can tend to write quite a bit more markup than you need for any single experience. So you might write 2 or 3 different versions of, say, your top-level nav or maybe image carousels or something like that that just operate very, very differently in one environment or another. And to show or hide them in your CSS, you basically just do a media query for the min width of the window and say, okay, we're obviously bigger than a phone, so we're going to show this chunk of HTML instead of this other chunk of HTML. And so we're going to hide all these other chunks of HTML. But you still had to send them down to the machine, and that's speed. Download speed is incredibly important for engagement. So that's if you really are having a timing problem, then this is a possible approach. Okay, so another thing is, like I said, when you are kind of managing multiple experiences, so if your mobile experience is very, very different than your full screen desktop experience, then you probably have a lot of very specific JavaScript code or very specific CSS that are geared just for one experience or the other. And as the project goes on, especially if you're working with a team, it can get very difficult to sort of like, you have to worry about regression testing a lot. So you don't really make a change necessarily if it's going to have unintended cascading effects across other versions. So when you're working on, let's say you've got one main CSS file for the site. If you make a change to it, then you have to go and test on everything because that CSS is getting presented on every single device, so that is a pain, especially if you're rushing to a deadline, it's crunch time, and you're just tweaking things in the CSS, and all of a sudden, to get the mobile experience working nicely, and you're breaking things on the desktop, it can be pretty frustrating, like a sort of a whack-a-mole situation. So that is that managing complexity is a pretty big deal on larger projects. Meanwhile, in the background, the screen share seems to be making progress, so I'm going to keep talking. And once we get to the portion where you really need to see the screen, hopefully it'll be ready by then. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of example use cases where this style approach would really help, because I don't want it to just be abstract. I want you to be able to recognize sort of your situation in this, recognize yourself in the situation, because this is not something you'll do on every project. It's something you'll do occasionally. And so these are some examples of actual projects that recently worked on that did call for sort of something beyond what media queries could do alone. If you go to entertainmentweekly.com, is this is something I recently worked on with a team of folks, and the complexity of the page is significant. Getting the beach ball still, hopefully. There we go. There's a lot going on here. There are carousels. There's all sorts of hover navigation, and you can imagine that on mobile it's a very different experience. So there's just a ton of HTML in this page. It's a really long page. It doesn't even want to scroll for me. So in order to make this load very quickly and just be extremely responsive, you want to pare down everything you possibly can and not be loading extra resources, because not just seconds, but actually milliseconds count when it comes to load time. So you can see that it's a fairly complex page. Another one that I recently worked on is the TechCrunch site. And again, there's just like a lot of stuff going on here. When you show it at different widths, there are I think 3 or 4 major breakpoints on this, and there are carousels, and it's just a lot. There's just a lot going on. So like I said before, it gets really complicated, and you don't know necessarily when you're making a change to the CSS late in a project exactly what all is going to get affected by that. So it's really, really nice to be able to do something like send down a mobile-specific style sheet without having to do something too radical. This display turns into accordions on mobile, but at the full desktop width, those are expanded, et cetera, et cetera. one of the things that we had to do this, not on this particular site, but I think it was this site actually. This site uses SVG icons wherever possible to give us a vector image format for things like the logo or icons, so that we don't have to offer multiple sizes for different devices. So if you detect for the pixel density, if you detect for SVG with something like Moderniser on the client side, then you can say, okay, SVG is going to work here, so we're good because that's what's in the HTML. But if Moderniser says that we don't have SVG available, then we can loop through and replace any .svg file extensions with .png. And that's all well and good, and it does work. But if we could have set that information on the server side, then you wouldn't see, in non-SVG browsers, you wouldn't see like briefly broken links to PNGs, or you wouldn't see those images loading late, so to speak. Another example that I've been working on lately is, it's not this particular site, but it's similar to this site. It's basically the same effect, where on the desktop you get this full screen autoplay hero video, which is really, really nice and engaging, full width. It just fills the viewport completely, and it looks great. And you don't want, however, you don't want it to, or you can't really do that on mobile. It's either not going to work, or it's going to launch the video player, depending on the phone. So you can't play the video, you can't autoplay the video, and there are no controls to play the video. It's just a background video. So on mobile, or someplace where you can't play it, you don't want to do that. And in fact, you might not even want the first frame of the video, because that might not be the best frame. It just happens to be the first one. So there might be some frame in the middle that you prefer to lead with. So you'll notice if I open this in, there we go, let me duplicate this tab, and I'm going to open my developer tools. You can hear my fan coming on, so keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully my machine won't go up in flames. All right, so you can see this is an extremely polished experience, and I am going to open up the DevTools, and I'm going to emulate an iPhone 5. I'm using Chrome for, I'm on a Mac. This is Chrome, and in the developer tools you can emulate different phones. You have to refresh the page though. And you'll see in the phone experience you get a full viewport image that is perfectly sized to the viewport. So this is one of those extremely polished experiences that I'm talking about to execute something like this. It's very different on the handset, on a mobile experience versus a desktop experience. And it's so different that you might want to actually send down different HTML, CSS, and or JavaScript for one experience or the other, because it will optimize performance and simplify your logic. So let me close those to free up some server. Another case that is a real case that has tripped me up. Was working on I have been working on an album site, a photo sharing album site that is specifically meant to be launched as a full screen web app in iOS and Android phones. So the business logic, not the sort of web logic or the general web philosophy, is kind of subverted by the business logic in this case, because the business wants the app, the sort of photo app, installed on the phone and launched from the home screen. So I need to know when it's in full screen mode, launched from the home screen, so that I can show things differently than if it's just being shown in Safari on the iPhone, for example. So that's okay. I can figure that out, but here's the issue. So an additional feature of the home screen web app is that it runs in offline mode, and we use the application cache for that to work, so that when users they want to look at their pictures, they don't need a network connection, And even if they did need even if they had a network connection, the images don't have to re-download. They're all stored locally on the phone, so that's real nice. The downside is when the experience when they go to the site for the first time in the browser, they go to a particular page, of the album, and we give them a splash screen that says, okay, download this to your home screen and then launch it from there, and then you can see the photos. And whether you think that's a good idea or not, there's an issue there, which is that the manifest URL is in that page in Safari, and Safari is going to start to download those images in the background, even though we're never going to show them visually on the screen. And these albums can be megabytes of photos, so it's not uncommon to have like 5, 10, 15 megabytes of photos in an album. And so when the user browses to that initially, they see a link in, somebody emails them a link, they click on a link, it opens Safari, the images start downloading in the background, even though we're not going to use them. There's nothing you can do about it on the client side at runtime. The user gets some instructions about how to install it to the home screen, and oh, by the way, those instructions need to know what browser they're being shown in so that we can show appropriate instructions, like screenshots for the right kind of button. Maybe we point to where the button is in that particular browser. You need to know what browser you're in order to instruct the user how to accomplish the task with screenshots. Okay, so that's actually two problems. So what happens is they follow the instructions and they install the application on the home screen, and then when they launch it from there, now the images download all over again because the sandbox is different than it is for Safari. So now if we had 10 megabytes of images, there's now 20 megabytes of images on the phone for no reason, and we've wasted their bandwidth in Safari because there was no reason to download those. But one of the limitations of app cache is that you can't define it at runtime, or at least I don't know how to, and I've looked. The web page either has a manifest or it doesn't, and that is an issue because we can't change it with JavaScript after the fact. Okay, so that's probably enough in terms of the stating the cases and the problems and why we might want to worry about this. So next I'm going to talk about some solutions you might have heard of that address this kind of thing, and one that's real popular and in fact is basically what I'm implementing here is Luke W.'s post from back in 2011. He talked about responsive design plus server-side components, or REST, which is essentially what we're talking about here, although he never in his post he doesn't really describe how to do it. He just says that it's useful to do in certain cases where you do want to alter your actual markup. Media queries don't let you alter the markup of your code. You could potentially do that with JavaScript, but it's kind of too late once it's already been downloaded. But this will be a link in the example file, so you can read about Luke's take on REST, which is a good one in my opinion. Another possible solution for sending down customized HTML, CSS, and JavaScript based on the client connecting, the browsing context, is something called WRFL, which stands for Wireless Universal Resource File. And in fact, Universal is a great name for it because it's a gigantic database of XML descriptions of different devices where it sort of maps user agents to this database, and you install it on your server, or I think they have I think they now have a sort of software as a service approach. And this, I've tried this and it does work, but it's got some things about it that I don't like. Maybe these matter to you, maybe they don't. But it's huge. Even just getting this on your server is a big deal. You need to install it. There's just a lot going on. If things haven't changed, it's PHP based, which may not float your boat. And it's also full of data for stuff. It has everything. It's like way back to old flip phones and things like that, where those are just automatic. Those actually aren't complicated anymore. Those are, you just give them like a basic non-CSS approach. It's really not that complicated to support those kinds of devices as it is to create polished experiences at the other end of the spectrum. So I have, to be fair to Wurfel, I haven't really looked at this in about a year. So if it sounds like it might be something interesting to you, then go ahead and check out wurfel.sourceforge.net. But that's not the solution we're going to talk about today. You could also sort of roll your own Wurfel and try and manually sniff on the server side your user agent string. But this is really tricky because user agents lie and they're really hard to parse reliably. So often what you end up doing is just pasting in specific user agent strings to say, on this particular device, don't do this, or on that device, if we see this string, it's probably an iPhone, so then do that. But that's extremely brittle, and if you're not spending a lot of time keeping that stuff up to date, it just tends to break all the time. Like, you can do it, and it'll get you over a delivery or a deadline or something, but it's almost certainly going to break in the near term. So that's a problem. So I got to thinking about this. I really needed to solve this problem, especially for the cache manifest things. I didn't want to be downloading all of those megabytes of images twice on people's phones. So I thought, geez, it would be great if I just had Moderniser on the server. And so I Googled Moderniser server, and what do you know? A friend of mine, actually, James Pierce, had created already something called Moderniser server. And it's actually a totally brilliant concept because what it does is it gives you feature detection on the server side. Normally on the server side you can't really do feature detection. You do user agent string sniffing, which, like I said, can be very brittle. So it's nicer to do feature detection where you can and just really limit the user agent sniffing to the very, very tiny, as little as possible, because it's just going to create more work for you in the long run. So James has this Moderniser server, and the thing that's brilliant about it is that he, instead of essentially rolling his own testing, what he did was he just included Moderniser and got that data moved over to the server. And you can obviously check this out on GitHub. I'm not going to go into this because I've created a sort of he hasn't touched this for a long time, and I've created a sort of Moderniser server plus that is, I think, a little simpler to understand. And anyway, you can decide. But that's what we're going to look at today, is a sort of Moderniser server plus. Okay, so those are all possible solutions that you might have heard of or haven't, but they are useful, and you can look into them more. But I think I'm always a fan of like the simplest possible approach that's going to get the job done, because you don't just build something and release it. There's maintenance, and there are other developers are going to come behind you, and you're not going to be there to explain why you did something. So I think it's really important to have self-documenting code and really simple stuff, as simple as possible, but no simpler. And so what I did was I said, you know what, I'm going to take James's idea and run with it and use Moderniser to do some detection, and then I'm going to pump that data to the server side. Let's see if we can. And his genius move of using Moderniser means that we benefit from all of the awesome work that Moderniser does. A team of people who are some of the smartest people in the business, and they have written a feature detection library. It's JavaScript, that's the thing though. Runs on the client side, and it detects tons of things. So if we go to the download page, they have this builder tool, so you can customize your download. So there's you can think of it in the one sense like, oh, okay, if I'm going to use Moderniser, I'm going to benefit from all this stuff, but do I really, I know I'm not using, I don't know, WebGL. I know I'm not using WebSockets. I know I'm not using workers, et cetera, et cetera. So you can check off the stuff that you want, exactly the things you want, and you can just update the Moderniser file on your web server with the approach I'm going to show you, and it just automatically works. So that the same Moderniser build, if you will, that you're using in your regular pages to kind of branch your CSS and JavaScript for the simpler stuff, you can actually use on the server side as well, exact same file, so that your if you need to tweak your HTML or, like, say, your image source paths or something like that on the server side, you get that control there too. It's genius. It was a great idea on his part. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Moderniser, you can go to moderniser.com/download. I can't think of a project I've worked on in recent memory that didn't use Moderniser. It's pretty awesome. So if you're doing web development and you're not using Moderniser, you probably should take a look at it. Okay, so what I've got here is a hosted version of the files I'm going to show you, and they are essentially iterations on a theme. So I'm going to start with the basic stuff and show you the guts of those files, and then I'm going to work my way up to a more complicated self-contained version. I am a PHP guy from way back, so these are in PHP, but it's very minimal. So if you have the slightest experience with Python or Ruby or any other server-side language, you'll easily be able to transform this into something usable to you. Okay, so let's pull up the source code. Here we are. All right, so here's my web root for the basic usage version, and it's an index file. That would be whatever the current page is. So that would either be your single page web app, or that could be the central controller in your application, or whatever it is. It'd be some global spot that is essentially an endpoint, a URL endpoint for your application. And inside of that file, I'll also toggle open my JavaScript. I've just got Moderniser and some jQuery convenience things in there. And let me open this. Come on. A little sluggish. Hang on. Computer's catching up with me. Going too fast for him. And here we go. Text editor's launching. Won't be long now. Drum roll, please. You gotta want it. Time for a new computer, I think. And at last. Hopefully this was worth the wait. Okay, so this is our index file. This is the, like I said, this is just a basic page. This would be the top of your page or the top of your global include or whatever, however your application is architected. And basically what we're going to do here is check to see if there's a cookie called Moderniser already set. And if it's empty, then we're going to include this Moderniser Server Plus page. If it's not empty, then it's set, and we can just grab the values out of it, which I do on page 11, on line 10 rather. And then beyond that, you can then start branching. So I don't want to go either too much into PHP or into any template-specific language, but presumably whatever web work you do involves server-side templating of one kind or another. Certainly HTML generation on the server side. So what this allows you to do, here's this example that I'm using is saying, okay, this is like an SVG example. So on the server, not the client, I'm saying, okay, if Moderniser SVG is true, then my image source for a given image would be, here's the path in the SVGs folder, and it would be an SVG image. If it's not SVG, then I need to use my PNGs. Oops, typo. I need to use PNGs. So since those are pixel-based image format, we want to check and see what the device pixel ratio is on the client side, but we need to know it on the server. So here I'm saying Moderniser extras device pixel ratio equals 2, so I know I'm on like a retina screen, or I could say 2 or greater. Then I'm going to use the image source like this, where I'm going into the PNGs directory, and I want the 900 pixel width ones, and there's my image there. If it's not 2, I'm assuming it's lower. I should probably use greater than or equal to here. Then we're going to use the 450. So this is just like a very simple example of some kind of branching. And the branching that you're going to do is like highly dependent on whether you're doing Rails development or you're rolling around PHP or whatever you're doing. So hopefully it's obvious, though, what the power is here is that we're getting this Moderniser information from the client on the server side. So that's the important thing to think about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of run this page. And the page also dumps out the entire Moderniser variable, so you can see all the different things that you can inspect on the server side to customize your HTML or CSS or JavaScript. So you can see things like support for Flexbox or Canvas, WebGL. You can see that this is not a touch browser because touch is blank. I do have geolocation. Maybe I want to have add an extra or maybe remove the zip code field from an input form if I know that the browser has geolocation. Web SQL database, that's another really big one if you're doing client-side storage of data, et cetera, et cetera. Hash change. There's just tons of really useful information to know about on the server side. And it goes on and on. So like I said, you can create customized versions of Moderniser to just sort of like limit this down to specifically what it is that you need. And we're going to talk more about why you might want to do that in just a second. So let's actually open up the Server Plus page so you can see what's going on there. How did we get this information over here on the server side? Give that a second to download. Okay. So Server Plus is just an HTML page, and inside the head I'm including Moderniser. Now here I'm using PHP to include it on the server side, so it's just going to inline all of the guts of this file right here into the head of this page. I could have done a regular JavaScript include and pointed to this page, but that would create another network request, and I didn't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do is just inject all of that content right here into the page. So so we don't need those extra network requests. Same for jQuery and jQuery cookie, which I'm going to use down below. And again, these things you don't have to use these. I just wanted to make it simple so you understood the concepts in this talk. And in case you're wondering, I put all of these semicolons in here in case either any of these are not ended properly. I'm sure they all are, but just to make sure we don't get some kind of weird error conflicting since I'm inlining all of the JavaScript. Okay, so that's the head. If we go down to the body, we sort of encounter our first problem with this approach, which is that it is JavaScript dependent. So here I've got a NoScript tag that says, sorry, this site requires JavaScript. You could do a lot of really interesting things here, much more interesting than this. In fact, I'd recommend you would, but it depends on your situation. So one thing you could do is have a link here that says, that basically links back to the page that was originally called, in this case index, that has a link that's something like index.php or whatever your file name extension is, with a query string that says no JavaScript or something like that. And then inside of your index page, you would detect for that above the cookie thing. So above that, you'd say, oh, is get no JavaScript set? Like, oh, yeah, it is. That means this person has no JavaScript, so we're going to have our branching logic behave appropriately here, in which case we just send back probably just raw HTML and CSS to this particular user, or maybe just raw HTML. It just depends on your situation. Another thing I often do, well, we'll get to that in a second. I want to get to the cookies part. So if we've got no JavaScript, then they're going to get a message, and we could give them a link back. Or another thing you can do is in the head you can have a delayed refresh with that get parameter in it, so that if you do have, you'd have to add some JavaScript down here to remove that. So it's basically say the page would automatically forward to a no JavaScript friendly version of the page, or back to itself in a no JavaScript friendly style, if JavaScript doesn't explicitly tell it not to. So that's sort of a cart leading the horse way to deal with it if you have no JavaScript. Next, on line 23, we have a no cookies message, which is hidden by default, but we know at this point that we have JavaScript, or we would have already dropped out. So when we get to the script, we can try and set a cookie. So we get the Moderniser variable, which is set automatically just by including the Moderniser library above in the head, and we just call the cookie Moderniser. And this is just arbitrary text that corresponds to the index page right here. So if you wanted to change that, you didn't like Moderniser, it was too long to type or something like that, you could switch over to here. Let me put these in the same window. You could switch over to just change this that string right there, and then it would correspond over here and over here. Whatever you want to set the cookie to is fine. Okay, so what we're doing there is just taking the whole Moderniser object and we're turning it into a string, a JSON string, and we're giving it an expiration date. So I'll talk more about this in a second, about the expiration. So then we say, okay, are cookies even enabled? If so, then cool, we're going to just reload this page, which is the index page, because this was included inside of index. And then we're going to go through this flow again, but cookies going to be set this time. And if cookies are not enabled and we can't set it, then we're just going to show this message up on line 23. So here, if they disable cookies for this domain or whatever, or the cookies just aren't on, or they're in some kind of environment that doesn't support cookies, then they're going to see this, sorry, this site requires cookies. And just like with JavaScript, you could give them some kind of, you could do something much more clever, like redirect them back to the index page with a no cookies flag, check for that at the top of the index page, and branch accordingly. And in fact, in production, that is usually what I will do. I'll do a checkup here that says, if no cookies present, get no cookies present is set, then set all of the Moderniser stuff to whatever I want for my default lowest common denominator browser. And then if I can get the Moderniser information back, then great, I'll have that. So if I set a sort of phony, like horrible browser version of Moderniser, when I get down here to the branching, then it's just going to be like SVG, no. Device pixel ratio, minimum, and it'll go through all of you still have your same branching, but you just sort of set it to defaults that are for a very lame browser, I suppose. Okay, but we need to make this a little bit better, this version of Moderniser better. So I'll close those and go up a level here. Hopefully my browser will cooperate. And let's go into this one. Prune internal bars. So since I'm using a full install of Moderniser here, it's got quite a few values, and the string that it's sending back is fairly long. It's between 1 and 2K, which you want to be careful of because there are limits to the size of the amount of information that you can put in a cookie. So if we go back, for example, to here and we scroll down to the bottom, these sort of underscore prefixed properties are just internal for Modernizer. I don't need them. I probably don't ever need them in my app. So what I'm going to do here in the is just delete them out of the object, which is going to save me some bytes. Additionally, if I wanted to go nuts, I could, once I was ready to go to production, I could go and create a custom build of Modernizer that just checked for the things that were in my logic branch, like SVG or device pixel ratio or what have you. So that's a little bit of an improvement there. We're pruning down the cookie size. If we can actually look at the cookie size. If it wants to. And let's get rid of that. And if we look at resources, you can see clear it and refresh it. You can see the Modernizer cookie. And the values is huge, stringified chunk of JSON, as you can see, and it's just about 2K, which is kind of big. So you probably do want to prune that down because that's going to get sent with every request. So you really just want Modernizer to be checking for the stuff you need to be checking for. And like I said before, you can use that same version of Modernizer in your actual site for your front-end CSS and JavaScript. So for anything that you're not handling on the server side, you can continue to use the exact same version of the file, the same file on the client for your front-end branching needs. Okay, so let's go to extras. All right, and here's where I actually start to output the example image path. And go up to number 3. So this version is all the same. Close up the head. But the difference here is that I've added in some extras. So Modernizer doesn't detect everything I want. So for example, I don't think device pixel ratio is a default in here. It's not. So I'm doing that in these. I'm creating some extra stuff that is hence the server Modernizer Server Plus, because I'm adding in some stuff that Modernizer doesn't currently send back. And this is information that I want about the user agent that, in terms of, just specs for the thing, and I could use them on the server side. So what I do is on line 31, maximize this. On line 31, I have just a quick polyfill for the navigator.standalone property. So this is going to tell me if the web page is loaded in full screen mode in iOS, or this sort of hack right here will tell you on Android that you're in full screen mode in newer versions of Chrome for Android. And then I just create this extras object where I've grabbed from the window the device pixel ratio, because that's nice to know, the screen height and the screen width, and that's not the window, that's the actual whole device. So if we see 3,000 pixels, we know we're not on a phone, or at least not a very portable one. So here I also grab window height and window width, and it's debatable whether or not that is a good idea, because we're storing this information in a cookie, and they could be resizing their window, and the initial window height and width would then that's stored in the cookie would then be invalid. That said, if you are really, really trying to make your first page load perfect and deal with that sort of resizing stuff in the client side with like an on-window resize listener, then it's fine to do this, but it does also, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how long do I let the cookie live? How long should it live? Should it be 24 hours? Should it be forever? Et cetera, et cetera. So that speaks to this expiration date in the cookie itself. And then finally, I put this standalone. So I want to know if I'm in standalone mode or not. So when we get back to the browser, we have this extras stuff down at the bottom. Let me
Hi, Jonathan, are you still there? Oh, folks, looks like we may have lost Jonathan. Give us a second. We'll try to get him back on the
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
All right, sorry. Errant keyboard command. All right, cool. So there we go. So the standalone is none now, as it should be. It actually was 1 before because I was running emulation mode. But anyway, so you see, you get this information. This is invaluable information in certain cases on the server side. To know you're in standalone mode is huge for the use case that I described earlier about the application cache manifest, for example. Okay, so we can take this one step further before I switch over to questions, and we can make it self-contained. Doing this makes it even more PHP specific, so that's why I didn't do all of the examples this way. But I'm going to open up both of these files. And when these open, you'll see that in the Moderniser server plus file, I'm actually doing the cookie check there. So it sort of simplifies my index page because the index page is, you're going to have a ton of those. I'm sure you probably have some global place in your templating or in your application logic, but still, you're going to want to minimize the amount of this logic that's visible in the application. You want it to just be magically work. So here, I've taken away the cookie check, and now I just include this file, and then over here, I've just added it over here. So if the cookie is set already, it means they already came to this page. I already dealt with it. Just return out of here and go back to the calling page. If it's not set, it's going to run through the normal operation. Set the cookie, reload the page, and then the next time this gets included, it just immediately returns, and you've simplified your logic a little bit here. Okay, so hopefully this has kind of broadened your horizons, given you an extra tool or at least another way to think about responsive design that extends to the server side, where we are, responsive design is about responding to the client context. And there's nothing that says that it has to happen on the client side. It could, if it can happen on the server side, then I think that's probably something we should be able to do with relative ease. There are some pros to this particular implementation that are, I think it's very simple to understand. It's very simple to use, especially if you've got it self-contained like this. You literally just include it in the page, and then you can start accessing this Moderniser variable from the cookie. And the other thing is that, or in the cons, sorry, the cons are that it does require a page refresh, which is a drag, but the way the cookies work, you need to do that. So perhaps you could, I suppose there's something clever that you could do with WebSockets, and I don't know, and frankly, that I think sounds too complicated and fragile to actually work. So like for something like this to work properly, it needs to work in a really, really wide range of browsers. So you want to use old HTML technology to do it, hence the cookies approach. So yeah, so it requires a page refresh. That's a bummer, but I don't think there's a way around it. And in virtually every case that there's been call for this sort of thing, a page refresh is a minor price to pay for the kind of perfection that they get after the refresh. And then, the other limitations are that it requires cookies in JavaScript, but we did talk about how you could sort of fail over nicely to send that information back to the calling page if you don't have cookies or you don't have JavaScript without using cookies or JavaScript to do so. which would allow you to really circumvent the problem. You can just default your Moderniser cookie, your Moderniser variable in here to something, that base object where you create a fake version of the Moderniser variable with everything set to the minimum, and then branch your logic in the rest of the page and the rest of the application based on that. All right, great. That is all I have for the presentation. I will switch back to slides. So if anybody wants to get the download link for the files, I will send that out via email a little later. Let's see if it's going to let me switch back. But while I'm doing that, Yasmina, if there are any questions and you wanted to ask those, we can do that while we wait for my computer to catch up.
All right, we do have a couple questions here. And folks, we are at Q&A, as you can hear. Please open your group chat widget. If you haven't opened it, type in your question, send it in, and we'll take as many as we have time for. Question here from Jonathan E. Will the cookie go back and forth with every request response, or might it not be better to save it in server session?
That would be a good idea once you do that, because the first time through you could save it in the server variable and then just be passing the session cookie back and forth. That is a good idea. I didn't want to get too specific into a PHP solution, but in the index page you could add that logic.
Great, thanks. And Prashant is asking if the code, including the PHP will be available later, and is that for your subscribe link? Yeah,
if you go to the subscribe link, I will have that.
I'll push that out.
JonathanStark.com/subscribe. I'll send that out probably later tonight.
There, it's on your screen now, folks, as well as in your group chat, so you can just click on it and go there. And let's see, any other questions, folks? Jonathan showed you a lot of very cool things today, and I know the conversation in the group chat has been really good, and people really looks like they're impressed with what they have seen. So if you do have a question, send it in now, and Jonathan will answer it while he's with us.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and if you think of something later, again, you can just ping me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to get back to you that way as well.
Great. Oh, we have one here from Rob. What approach did you use on EW.com?
EW.com was very complicated, and we did not use, well, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't have used this on the server side because it wasn't my job on that particular site. In my personal opinion, it could have benefited from that approach, but we just sort of dealt with the complexity on the client side, and then we left the actual implementation of it to the team who did the implementation. So we just had to do the design, basically, the design and the front-end logic. So honestly, I don't know how they ended up doing it because we didn't do that, but I was using that as an example because I'm super familiar with the code, and I know that it's the kind of complexity that would have benefited from it.
Let's see here. Prashant would like to know if there is a non-PHP version for Moderniser server.
I don't believe James created another version, and the one that I am using is actually not PHP. The first ones that I was showing, not the very last one. The last one has some PHP in it. And the first ones have that a little bit of PHP in the script header, but you could actually remove that. In fact, I will remove that so that it's completely agnostic, so that when you use it, you could put the file anywhere. You can name it whatever you want, and just include it, and it'll work no matter what because it'll just be an HTML file. So I'll actually do that in the repo that I push out to y'all.
Let's see here. Chris is asking, what's the advantage of this approach versus media queries?
Well, media queries can't happen until the HTML is already all the way down to the client. So and the CSS. So if you want to, like, if you're going to send down a bunch of HTML and 50% or more of it is just going to get hidden depending on how big the screen is or the screen resolution or something like that, then this is a big, big optimization. So you lose a second, not even a full second. You lose some milliseconds doing the refresh. Well, it depends on your network, but you lose some time with the refresh, but you gain a ton in that download and all subsequent downloads. So every subsequent download, the server knows what kind of device you're on. It knows the features that you have access to. So it's going to send down just exactly what you need and not tons of CSS, JavaScript, and HTML most likely that you're not even going to use. It's just going to be hidden the whole time. The big win really is with images. So, HTML is one thing, but if you're sending down huge images and then scrunching them down to fit the phone, that could be it's not trivial. Like, it's a noticeable difference in rendering performance if you send down a properly sized image.
Perfect. We'll take a final question here from Stefan. He's asking, are tools like webpagetester.org working with that solution because of the reload?
I'm not familiar with that one, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And one final one here. Stefan's also asking regarding Google and SEO. What is Google's opinion of all of this?
Again, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that it's not uncommon approach. I believe even Facebook has like a cookie tester redirect. It's probably not the best thing in the world for SEO. So because the speed of a page load seems to affect your page ranking. But this is one of those things where, like, it just happens the very, very first time. So it's an open question. I'm not sure what effect it would have. I mean, no one really knows, I suppose, unless they've specifically posted about it. But it's one of those things that for your users, it just happens once, and I think that's a huge benefit.
And with that, folks, we're going to say a very big thank you to you, Jonathan, for spending your time with us today and for sharing your knowledge and expertise.
My pleasure.
And, folks, we've also pushed out a couple of goodies here for you all in the group chat. So if you didn't open it, please open it before you leave. There's a code in there to save you some money on Jonathan's books. He's got his Building iPhone Apps book and the Building Android Apps book. You can get the ebooks today for 50% off with the code WCYAZ. So open the group chat. The code is WCYAZ. Write that down. Also, Jonathan will be with us again next month, May 15th, and he's going to talk about real-world design, a behind-the-scenes look at the Entertainment Weekly redesign. You don't want to miss that. It's going to be awesome. Again, May 15th, write that down. We push the code out so you can register for free. And we thank you all for attending today's webcast. Hope you've benefited from it. Thank you, Jonathan. This will conclude our webcast today, everyone. Goodbye.